Don't believe a fucking word he said. He's lying through those fucking stitches of his. I would never kill my own mother. He fucking did it. When he handed my phone back to me and informed me that he had added a new part to my log, I was worried to see where it was going to go, and to my shock and horror it was worse than I imagined. He's lying through his fucking teeth. I swear he is. I told him as much. All he did was laugh at me and issue me a challenge. As he said that the strings released me and I collapsed to the stage with a hard thud. You think I'd lie to you, Travis my boy? He scat at me. Approaching me and he kneeled. Pushing my chin up with his fingers he smiled down at me and fixed my hair. How about this? I'll let you go for 24 hours. If you can't prove to me that you haven't lost your marbles, I'll let you go. Cross my heart, he said, pulling me up to my feet and dusting me off. What makes you think I won't just take this opportunity to run? I spat at him, keeping my distance and making sure he didn't do anything funny with me. I know his tricks. I know how he thinks. And I know for a fact he'll take any opportunity he can to hurt me. Because I've read your little conversation with the Baron. And I can safely say that no danger is going to come my way. He chuckled, turning and walking away from me. Despite the strings no longer controlling me, I couldn't just lunge and rip him to shreds as badly as I wanted to. Not until he exited the auditorium was I finally able to move on my own. Rushing after him and throwing the doors open, I was met with the charred remains of the Voodoo store once again. Looking around in pure confusion, then looking back at the door which was now the basement door, I rubbed my head in confusion. Shaking that out of my head and making my way out of the burned down remains, a sign attached to the outside frame of the door to the shop was prominently displayed. It read, "Coming soon. The grand reopening of all King Creoles." I grabbed the sign and ripped it from its place. No way will I let him reopen the shop. Not after what he did to me. Running off towards my house, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Seeing my house was still abandoned and theorizing that Alexandra and Olivia were back at their home, I entered the house and changed into my normal clothes. Tossing the suit I was forced into wearing at the wall of my room and sitting down to think. He's lying. I mumbled to myself. There was no way in hell that I did that to my own mother. Heading back down to the living room, I went to the spot where my mother had been lying. Well, her body at least. I closed my eyes and tried to think. I know I said goodbye to her and left the house. Right. I did say that. I did. My button eyes scanned the room for the murder weapon that Creole had said I had used. A kitchen knife. Not finding one, I chuckled. My first proof that he was lying. That was until I took a step forward and suddenly found myself bending under the fridge. How the hell did I get there? Looking around confused, I soon found the reason I was laying on the floor reaching underneath my fridge. It was because I pulled out the bloody kitchen knife. Staring at it in horror, I quickly tossed it away and backed up from it, grabbing my hair and shaking quickly. No, that didn't make any sense. He planted it there. It was obvious he did. He's just trying to fuck with me. Reaching out for the knife again, I took it into my hands and looked at it. The blade was bent. I didn't do this. I mumbled to myself, dropping the knife and looking back to where my mother had been sitting. I had seen her. And I had told her I loved her. I had. Shaking my head, I quickly stood and rushed past the dried bloodstain on the floor and looked around for my mother's body. But most likely Creole had had his cop buddies remove it after he took me. Reaching for my phone, I quickly dialed my dad, hoping he would pick up. "Travis, I've been worried sick about you," he quickly shouted at me, sending my stress levels way down just hearing his usual yelling voice. Letting out a cathartic breath, I sat down on one of the couches and just let him scold me for a bit. "Dad, how bad was Mom's body?" I asked, interrupting his lecture. There was a long period of silence as he was obviously caught off guard by the question. He and Mom were high school sweethearts. They'd known each other their whole lives. And I knew he was hurting just as bad as I was. Bad. Real bad. Her neck was jagged. Like he just hacked away at her with a kitchen knife like it was a dull axe. He mumbled to me. That gave me some hope. Creole was decapitated with a dull saw. Did he do the same to my mother in revenge? Did you find the knife? I asked him, looking back at the kitchen and seeing the knife was still where I had left it. No. It was nowhere to be found. Where are you, son? I don't want to lose you as I lost her. My dad said. Obviously choking back tears. Rubbing my face, I looked at the spot where Creole had been drinking coffee next to my mother's head. I'm at home. Where are you? I finally answered, giving my dad time to get his emotions in check. I had warned him to get out of town when he had found Mom's body. I was hoping he had heeded my warnings. At a hotel. Just outside of town near the freeway. He explained. I nodded as he gave me the details. I said I would be there soon. Hanging up with "I love you." I sighed and started on my way. Past the destroyed door and took a look at the pieces of it. It was broken out of. Not into it. Swallowing a lump in my throat, my next destination was Alexandra's house. Pulling my hood over my face, I made my way there. It took me a bit to get there on foot. But when I arrived, I knocked on their door. Noticing the hole in their window was still there. The door cautiously opened as Alexandra looked at me and hesitated to open it all the way. "Travis," she said in a shocked gasp, looking around me before opening the door all the way. "Did you escape?" she asked me, letting me enter the house, but she kept a good distance between the two of us. I thought it was for her betrayal of me. It had to be for that, right? No. He let me go. So I could prove that I'm not the one who killed my mom. I explained, walking past her and looking around the house. She avoided eye contact with me when I looked back at her, and I started to get worried. "You don't think I did that, do you?" I asked. My heart broke when I tried to approach her, and she backed up further away from me. "I don't know. Travis. How long has it been since you've last slept?" she asked me. Concern plastered all over her face. I looked at her like she'd just insulted my mother. She wasn't on his side too, was she? "Last night. When I was being suspended from the strings again," I told her, crossing my arms and staring at her in a defensive manner. And her face grew paler as a result. I didn't know it could, since she was about as pale as I was. "Travis. You couldn't sleep when connected to the strings. Remember? At the shop, you were never allowed to sleep," she told me. And my stomach dropped as I lost my balance and backed up into the wall behind me. She had a point. "So, ever since I escaped, I've been able to sleep." I shot back at her, pushing off from the wall and pointing at her, sending her cowering back and backing up into the living room as I followed after her. "Travis. When you were in my bathroom, after your mother's head was thrown in there, what did you do?" she asked, shaking. I stared at her for a good long while, my button eyes trailing to the bathroom. Walking in that direction, I opened the door and stared at the sight before me. The entire room was a mess, things broken and thrown in random directions. All I remember was trying to cry in here. "I didn't do this. You're trying to set me up. You hit me in the back of the head and turned me over to him," I shouted in anger, taking a shard of broken glass from the bathroom mirror and pointing it at her. She threw her hands in the hair and backed up further away from me. "No. You attacked me. Why, you tried to attack me and yelled awful things at me," she whimpered, truly terrified of me. I looked down at my hand and stared at the shard of glass I was threatening her with. What was I doing? I dropped it and walked off towards the door. "Tell Olivia to take care of Tempe for me. He makes a better doll than her old mother," I said as I exited their home. Tuning out words Alexandra said back to me. Pulling my hood back on, I stuck my hands into the pocket and walked off in no particular direction. "I didn't kill my mom. He's fucking lying. He's wrong. I love her. I would have never done that to her." My aimless wandering suddenly had me walking right into the gate of the old cemetery. I looked around in complete confusion. How the hell had I gotten here? I went in the complete opposite direction of this place. And this place was a good hour's walk from Alexandra's house. Pulling out my phone, I stared at it in disbelief. It was an hour's walk. Because it had been an hour since I last checked the time. No, I stammered, stepping away from the cemetery and staring at the rusted and overgrown door. Creole's words to you guys echoed in my head like a gong. "Watch out for when I black out." I shook my head so hard I thought the stitches holding it on would bust and my head would go rolling. "The hell's the matter with you, son?" a familiar nasal voice asked me, causing me to look to my side and see none other than the Baron. Shovel slung over his shoulder and staring at me like I was some freak show attraction. He was chewing on one of my dad's cigars. I quickly stumbled over to him and looked up at him. What's happening to me? What did that psycho and his mother do to me? I begged him. He chuckled with a grin as he took the cigar out of his mouth and taped it over me like I was an ashtray. You shouldn't play with life and death, son. Only a professional can do it right. Creel's mother is one, so he got off mostly scot-free. Him on the other hand. His work is downright shitty. He said to me, setting his shovels down and looking at me as he puffed away at the cigar I had given him. I would love nothing more than to tie up all his loose ends. But Mama Creole and I have an understanding. I can always tie up your loose end, of course. He said with a chuckle. I looked up at him, confused by what he meant. I don't have any loose ends. I've never brought back anyone from the dead before. That got a genuine cackle out of the Baron. He slapped his leg as he let out a howl of laugh, looking at me like I had said the funniest shit in the world. You're a loose end, son. Why do you think I offered to help you? Getting rid of Creole helps get rid of you. Before you get too comfortable with your little murders. He chuckled. I saw into those buttons of yours. I saw something bad brewing in them. So I offered you the way to beat him. Though it seems like you're running out of time in that regard. He said, leaning down to pick up his tools as I stared at him in horror. I haven't killed anyone. I shouted at him. He looked at me with a raised brow as he blew smoke from his nose, taking the cigar out of his mouth again and taping the ash off. You sure about that? You certainly did a number on your own mother, he said with a smile, pushing the door to the cemetery open and entering it, shutting it close behind him as I stared at the spot where he had been. I wrapped my arms around myself and fell to the floor as I rocked back and forth. No. 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 He's wrong. Fucking wrong. I screamed, looking back at the cemetery door and banging on its door. Do you hear me? I didn't kill her. I screamed, smashing my fists into the rusty door and clawing at it. Shoving myself away from it, I walked off in no particular direction. I pulled up my phone and texted my dad to come to pick me up. As I waited at the spot we determined, I stared down at my hands, covered in the door's rust. Don't really think I have to worry about tetanus as a voodoo puppet. As I sat at a park bench and wait for my dad, I did my hardest to try and remember back to when I had left the house. I clearly remember walking down the stairs, walking past my mother and saying I loved her, and being on my way to the graveyard. There was no way I could have done that. Travis. My dad's voice shouted at me. Looking up, I saw that he was already here. I raised a brow at that. How the hell had I not heard him? I shrugged and just entered the car and sighed as I sat there. Finally. I thought I was going to have to honk at you. He sighed, putting the car in drive and driving us both towards the highway. Dad. I finally spoke up after an awkward length of time. My dad looked at me for a second and then back at the road. His signal that I had his attention. Have I been sleeping? I asked him. He raised a brow at that question and shrugged. Shouldn't you be the one who knows that? He asked me, pulling into the exit to the hotel. I sighed and shook my head, letting the conversation die right there. Thankfully we could skip the lobby since my dad already had booked 2 single beds, in case I finally showed up in need of a rest. Taking me up to his room, I looked around at the stereotypical hotel room. Entering the bathroom, I closed the door behind myself and again let out a long and sad sigh as I sat on the toilet seat and put my face into my hands. I didn't kill her. I didn't kill her. I didn't kill her. Creole's deadline loomed large in my mind as I washed my hands of the rust still on them. Some of it had gotten underneath my fingernails, so I scrubbed and picked at them to get my nails cleaned. Except on closer inspection, it wasn't rust. It was dried blood. Backing up from the sink, I stumbled and fell into the bathtub. Taking the shower curtain with me, I sat in complete shock. Standing up, I quickly shut off the water and walked out of there. You okay? My dad asked me, concern plastered on his face. I assured him that I was perfectly fine. Just slipped and tumbled into the shower. He and I laughed it off and sat to watch the hotel's crappy TV. I sat and watched in awkward silence as I fidgeted with my fingers. Where had all this blood under my nails come from? Dad. I finally spoke up, clearing my throat again to wake him from his slumber. He had a habit of falling asleep whenever the TV was on. He snorted awake and looked at me. I'm going to go get some fresh air, I said. He gave me a nod and handed me the room key. Walking out of the room, I put my hood on and mumbled to myself as I walked along the halls of the hotel. As I wandered around, I found myself heading outside and to my dad's car. Unlocking it, I climbed into the passenger seat and opened up the glove box. Aside from all the paperwork and random crap in there, I found the item I wanted. My dad, along with being a smoker and drinker, is also a hunter. And inside the glove box was a hunting knife. Taking the item and hiding it in my hoodie pocket, I closed the car door and locked it. I once again entered the hotel and made my way back up to our room. Unlocking it and entering it, I found my dad asleep again on the bed. I didn't kill her. I didn't grab her by her hair and stab her in the neck. Then while she was on the floor, I hacked away at her throat with the knife until her head fell off her shoulders. Taking the knife out of my pocket, I pulled it from its sheath and dropped the sheath to the floor. Climbing on top of my dad, he jerked himself awake and stared up at me in horror as I drove the knife into his torso. He didn't get to scream much after I slit his throat. Just like you showed me, Dad. I chuckled as I gutted him like the animals he had made me gut when he took me hunting when I was young. I giggled loudly as I stabbed and stabbed him. I had more time to have fun with him than I did with my mom. So I made sure to show everybody all my hard work. Some guts over here, his head on the TV. I had so much fun. I killed her. I killed him. Maybe now King Creole will say what a good boy I am now. What happened? I didn't kill her. And my dad is dead. Why? I didn't do this. I went for a walk and found him dead. No. Yes, I did. I did it. I did it. I did it.